This video will cover Part 1 of Chapter 15, Applying to Graduate School in Psychology for PSY 120, Careers in Psychology, Neuroscience, and Human Development. If you're considering graduate school, the first question you really need to ask yourself is it a good fit for you? And does it fit with your aspirations, your goals, your plans for the future? Most undergraduate students in Psych, Neuro, and HDFS at least consider graduate school, and that's largely because a lot of our majors are considering applied careers in the helping professions, and that kind of work, if you want to actually provide mental health services to people, does require an advanced degree. So lots of students consider graduate school, but most psychology students, if you look at all psych majors, all neuro majors, all HDFS majors across the country, the majority do not go to grad school. They go into the workforce right away. In fact, only about a quarter, about 25% of new bachelor's degree recipients go straight into graduate school. Now that goes up if you consider students who go on and get advanced degrees in other fields. It may be related fields, it may be completely divergent from that. When you get an undergraduate degree, even if it's in psychology, you can go on to, say, medical school, to PA school, to all kinds of health-related career schools, or you could go and get a business degree. So some people who study psychology and neuroscience as undergraduates go on to graduate school in other degree areas. If you're thinking about going on to graduate school in psych, neuro, or human development and family sciences, ask yourself some hard questions about why you want to do that. Some people want to go to grad school simply because they love learning, while others are wanting to make sure that they have the required credentials to get the career that they want. Some do it for both reasons, because they like learning and it's the prerequisite degree for the job that they want to have. And those are both valid reasons. So if you decide to go to grad school, you want to choose the level of education that matches the career that you are seeking. So I have lots of conversation with my students who are, their end goal is to work in service delivery. They want to provide counseling services, assessment services, treatment services to people or families. And I talk to them about, what you want to do in that work. If you want to simply deliver those services, provide counseling services one-on-one or in groups or with families, do you want to own your own practice? Do you want the ability to work independently, calling yourself a professional psychologist, or do you want to be a counselor? If what you want is to deliver counseling services, but you don't necessarily want to run your own practice or work completely independently, the master's degree with licensure is sufficient. If, however, you want to run your own practice, you want to have supervisory responsibilities over other people, and or you want to teach at the college level as a faculty member, then a doctoral degree is going to be required. So you need to really think about the level of education that fits what you want to do in the future. So think about your reasons for going to grad school in the first place and what you hope to do with that graduate degree. If, for example, you just are thinking, I'll just go to grad school while I figure out what I want to do, that's really not a good use of your money. Graduate school is expensive, and the work is difficult. If you're using the time to make up your mind, grad school is very, very focused. So just going to grad school while you think about what you want to do with your life is not a great strategy. It would make more sense for you to get an entry-level job, work for a while you think hard about what you want to do, then go to graduate school. Think about what your goals are so that you can make the right decision, and so that you can make a decision that you'll be able to live with for a long time. These days, you do need to ask yourself, can you afford grad school? Depending on what type of program you're looking at, graduate school can be more or less expensive. Typically, if you go into a doctoral program at a large university, and a doctoral program that is academically based, and we'll talk more about those differences in a little bit, typically you will be provided with some degree of funding. You will be offered tuition remission. You may have access to research assistantships and teaching assistantships as a part of your graduate program. If, however, you're going to a master's program, or you're studying for a professional degree like a PsyD program, or another kind of professional degree, those programs typically do not offer those kinds of funding opportunities. So what you're looking at is paying for it out of pocket or getting loans in order to pay for those programs. So you know this already. Higher education costs a lot. It's expensive, and you're making an investment that you're leveraging against your future career earnings. Graduate study tends to be more expensive than undergraduate study, although that varies tremendously. This is older data. This is 21-22 data. You can imagine increasing this proportionally. The median annual graduate school tuition, and that's all kinds of graduate programs, so this number is not 100% informative, but it's about 20 grand. Lower price for public institutions, higher for private institutions, and the cost goes up considerably if you are looking at professional degree programs. So for example, if you get a clinical psychology PhD at a publicly funded large university, you're likely to be offered tuition remission as well as a stipend of some kind. You may have to take out loans for cost of living and things like that. But if you got a clinical degree in a PsyD program, which is a professional degree program, it's very much like medical school. You're going to pay out of pocket, and the cost is going to be significantly higher. So you really need to think about some of your expenses. You'll have to pay for where you live, your just basic living expenses, and also fees, books, supplies that are going to be required for your schooling. Also, depending on the rigors of your graduate program, often in PhD programs, the expectation is you are a full-time student, and there will be varying levels of disappointment if you intend to work your way through grad school. Now, lots of people do it, and graduate programs are becoming more flexible with time, particularly at the master's level, making it more possible for people to continue to be employed while they are graduate students. Now, it is typical for graduate students to carry some level of debt postgraduate school. Depending on the type of program that you're applying for, you have more or less debt. You also need to ask yourself whether you're prepared for the demands, the rigors academically of graduate school. Graduate school is not the same as undergraduate. Graduate school tends to be very, very focused on the specific area of study that you're pursuing. In college, you have lots of emphasis on breadth, so you're studying lots of different topics, lots of areas. You're also getting basic skills. You're also engaging in extracurriculars. In grad school, it's about the thing you are studying, and it's about your professional development in that area. In addition, the academic expectations of graduate students are much higher. So Typically, graduate students are going to be expected to do extensive library research and research using databases to conduct literature reviews. They're going to be expected to write longer papers at a higher level of competency. They are going to be learning about advanced statistics, and then they're expected to use those advanced statistics. They're also often expected to either do teaching or to conduct research under supervision. They may be engaged in mentoring undergraduates. If they're teaching, they may be teaching undergraduates. Doing this kind of work, especially at the doctoral level, requires a great deal of self-motivation and discipline. Being smart and curious and having good emotional skills is a plus. It does require that you are ready to deal with uncertain situations and ambiguous situations and be able to roll with those. Now, at the master's level, master's programs tend to be a bit less demanding in terms of the level of academic work, but they tend to be very fast-paced. So, for example, if you compare, say, a clinical PhD program, you're going to have a lot of coursework in the first 2 years, making sure that you have the prerequisite academic background to do independent research. Along the way to the PhD, you're likely going to do a master's thesis, which is research-based, and then the last 3 to 4 years of your doctoral degree program, you'll be doing your doctoral research in addition to developing your clinical skills by working under supervision to deliver clinical services. A master's degree program, there's still coursework in the first year, a lot of clinical training in the second year, and perhaps into the third year. Both the PhD and the master's program require an internship under supervision afterwards. Essentially, when it comes right down to it, if you've done well as an undergraduate student, you typically have the intellectual capacity to do well in graduate school. The key differential is, do you have the kind of stick-to-itness? I think that's a word. Probably not. But can you stick to it? Can you do self-management? Can you continue to be motivated and work your way through the program? So you're making the decision as you think about what your options are. Talk it over with your academic advisor. Talk it over with people you know so that you have a good understanding of what your options are. Think about your reasons for graduate study, what your career goals are going into the future. Be honest and candid, talking with your advisor, other faculty, about what grad school is like before you make the decision. So really be candid about what your goals are and what it's going to take to get there. And then, make sure that the level of education that you're selecting, like, am I going to go straight into the job market with my bachelor's? Do I need to get a master's degree? Is there some kind of certification that I could seek that's in between the bachelor's and the master's? Is the master's sufficient for what I want to do? Is the doctoral degree required for what I want to do? Finally, if you're thinking about grad school, remember you don't have to go right away. There was a time in many, many, many years ago where it was seen as problematic. If people took a break and wanted to go to grad school later, it was seen as a problem. That is no longer the case. People tend to move in and out of careers, and that frequently involves retraining. So particularly at the master's level, there's way more tolerance now for people who are midlife, who have been in the workforce for quite some time, to apply and be accepted to graduate school. Now, on the service delivery side, and to a lesser degree, you can find this in neuroscience as well, there are different kinds of training models. So here we're largely talking about clinical and counseling psychology as well as forensic psychology. In the practice areas of like clinical neuroscience, you may find the same kinds of things. So unlike college, graduate study is highly specialized, and you're specializing in that particular area. The master's degree in psychology, as well as the doctoral degree, may take a couple of different forms. In our applied areas, let me start over. In non-applied areas, like for instance, my area is experimental social psychology. It's just researcher. It's just the scientist. Our opportunities for working do not involve service provision. They may involve private sector research, but it's a researcher-scientist model that we follow. If you're talking about the service provision areas, then there's more than one model for designing the graduate program. So some programs are very research oriented, and they're designed for training people for academic or private sector research jobs. In some cases, you have models of graduate study that are both scientist and practitioner models. So you're trained as a researcher and as a practitioner. And that's the traditional approach to doctoral and master's degree programs for clinical and counseling psychology, is that scientist practitioner model. A more recent addition is the practitioner or professional practice model. We see this somewhat more often at the master's degree level, where people are really just digging into building all of their practice-related skills, like delivering counseling services, with a lesser emphasis on the research side, and these are programs less likely to demand a formal thesis. At the PhD level, similarly, the PsyD, which is a professional psychology degree, it's highly practice-oriented. It's designed to get people up and running and out into practice as soon as possible, and it tends to not require a research-oriented doctoral dissertation. Instead, if there is research, it tends to be practice-related. At the master's degree level, there are research and practice models, as I mentioned before. The research-oriented master's degrees are generally more experimental in nature. So there are lots of experimental psychology programs that may offer an area of specialization, like in IO or social or consumer or developmental. We are starting to see more specialty master's programs in popular areas. They may show up in applied developmental or forensic, for example. The ones that I've had the most students go into have tended to be in industrial organizational, where people need to get a lot of research-based skills, particularly in statistics and data analysis, before going on to careers in, say, market research analysis or consumer psychology. Typically, master's degrees that are research-oriented are going to require 2 years of full-time study and the completion of a thesis that's based on an individual research project. Practice-related master's degrees, there's an educational base, but then a lot of supervised training and experience that leads to those state certifications and licenses that can get people into practice. Some of these graduate programs are exclusively practice-oriented, and they include a year-long supervised practice experience, in addition to basic coursework. In some cases, these programs will extend to 3 years. Most students who are interested in working toward becoming a master's level counselor, where they have a license and certification to practice, are going to get degrees in counseling, social work, marriage and family therapy, something of the like. A lot of our majors in psychology and HDFS If counseling is what they want to do, this is the direction that they go. They find a practice-oriented master's program to be in. At the doctoral level, and here we're talking about PhDs and EDDs for the most part, doctoral programs with a researcher scientist model, they're really looking at building students who want to do science in their fields. So the PhD in psychology is going to include, a lot of experimental methods, a lot of statistics, and you'll be studying in a specific specialty area. So, for example, in my graduate program, there were degrees, research-based degrees that you could get in social personality, developmental, sensation and perception, general experimental, cognitive, and so on. So you pick an area of specialization, and often the goal here with the researcher scientist model in these degree areas is to move into academic or private sector research jobs. So what people are doing while they're in their PhD program is they're conducting original research. They're taking coursework usually in the first 2 years, and then spending the rest of their graduate experience conducting research, probably teaching, or doing research in a supervisor's lab, sometimes both, writing about their research findings, doing presentations, and so on. PhD recipients tend to be employed as researchers. They may be college professors or university professors. Some go on to consulting careers in business, in government. The EDD degree is the doctoral level degree in education. It may be sought after by people who are interested in that intersection between education and psychology. There are sometimes individuals who are interested in the counseling area, specifically as it relates to education, who pursue the EDD degree as well. If they're in a program that is a researcher scientist model, then what they're looking at, just like with the PhD, is degrees or jobs rather that involve academia or the private sector. The scientist practitioner model is more related to people who are going to be engaged in direct service provision. In these PhD programs, graduates are going to, in addition to their basic coursework that they're likely to complete within the first couple of years of graduate study, they're going to conduct research. It could be basic research, it could be applied research, and they're going to, develop a master's thesis and a doctoral dissertation. At the same time, they're going to be developing their clinical and counseling skills, and the same goes for school psychology, developing those clinical and counseling skills in addition to conducting research. Graduates who are trained in this model they practice in a lot of different environments. They could be in clinics, mental health centers. They can also be in private practice. They may be working in academia and not practicing at all. They may do both. Like, for example, Dr. Meyer and Dr. Cook both are PhD level clinical psychologists, and they both work in private practice in addition to being full-time faculty members in academia. Now, the degree to which any given psychologist is going to do practice and or research depends on what they want to do. So in some ways, the scientist practitioner model has the greatest flexibility because you can choose to either go into academic research or consulting research, or you can go into practice, or you can do both. Now, the professional psychologist practitioner model leads to what's referred to as a PsyD degree. These are individuals who are mainly trained to provide psychological services, clinical work, counseling work, and so on. So the PsyD degree, it's a practitioner-related degree. The emphasis is very strongly on clinical training, and that includes assessment training, testing training, training on how to deliver various forms of psychotherapy, and so on. The practitioner model emphasizes, as it says, clinical practice. There's much less focus on research. When research is part of the program, it tends to be action-oriented, so it's more reflective. It's not so much, I'm going to conduct an experiment on X, Y, and Z. It's more related to what was the experience of using this clinical technique like, or it may involve case studies, and so on. PsyD programs tend to take in more students than PhD programs, so your chances of getting in are higher, but they also tend to be more expensive. Because they are practice-oriented, you're far less likely to be given funding, like tuition remission and research assistantships or teaching assistantships in those kinds of institutions. They're significantly more likely to be a part of for-profit institutions as well, so you do need to be careful that they are APA accredited programs. PsyD students do tend to get their degrees more quickly, but they usually tend to graduate with more debt, and the degree is somewhat less flexible. So like if you decided that after you got your PsyD and you were in practice for a while, you wanted a full-time academic job, there is still a bias against those individuals with PsyD degrees because they simply have less training and experience as researchers. That said, the PsyD may be what you want if you know for sure you are never going to want to teach in a university setting or get a research job where that is what you do full time. Then the PsyD may be right for you. But you have to think about the pros and cons carefully and make sure that the program is APA accredited, or it's very, very difficult to get your postdoctoral internship. Master's degrees in professional fields, you weigh the costs and benefits of the PsyD versus the master's degree. You're going to get the same kind of licensure and certification from your state to deliver practice. The PsyD may have the advantage of allowing you to supervise other people with a master's degree and to train them, whereas the master's degree you have to work under supervision. At the same time, though, the master's degree is less expensive and you'll carry less debt when you're done. And that concludes part 1 of chapter 15.